Hello students, welcome back. How are you all? Myself Pushpendra Singh, and we are going to start with our current affairs. Today you have 27th of April 2021. All right, as you know that these lectures are basically useful for those who are preparing for the civil services examination, which is conducted by the UPSC. You can also refer these lectures for your other government competitive examinations also. And for that purpose, you must study the national newspapers like the Hindu or Indian Express. Both are equally good, right? You can refer any of these newspapers and you can subscribe for these lectures, which are based on entirely on current affairs on the YouTube, which are uploaded on the day-to-day basis, right? Which can supplement your preparation for the civil services examination, right? All right, so let's start with the lecture. Okay. So first news related to the project DENTAC. Okay. Now this project DENTAC is basically related to the Bhutan. Okay. So the project DENTAC, which basically involve certain, infrastructural projects. Okay. So recently the project DENTAC completes the 60 years in the Bhutan. Okay. And in that purpose, the project DENTAC is also commemorating the Diamond Jubilee, right? After completing the 60 years in the Bhutan. Okay. So the DENTAC, which is basically met various infrastructure requirement in the Bhutan, okay, which is in accordance with the majesties or third king of the Bhutan, okay, who were basically instrumental behind the bringing of this project, okay, to the Bhutan with the help of the Prime Minister of India Jawaharlal Nehru also. So both of these leaders are having vision to implement these infrastructure project in the Bhutan. Apart from the infrastructure facilities which were set up or which were constructed under this project DENTAC, there was also the medical as well as the educational facilities was also constructed in the far-flung areas, okay, and along with that there was food outlets along the roads, right, and then some sort of a canteens were also set up all along for the purpose of for the purpose of various infrastructure projects. So the DENTAC celebrates the 6 decades in the Bhutan, and this project basically reaffirm its commitment to support, right, the march of the Bhutan towards realizing the dream of its third king, that was His Majesty Druk Gyalpo, right? And the plan of the third king of the Bhutan as well as the royal government of Bhutan, right, to fulfill the aspirations of the people regarding the economic development as well as the infrastructure development in the Bhutan. Okay, so this is just in background. So I've told you that the project DENTAC was established on April 24th, 1961. So it has completed 60 years of its, of its basically completion. So it has basically result of the visionary leadership of its majesty, that is the third king of the Bhutan that was there, okay, at that point of the time. So the third king of the Bhutan was basically the Jigme Dorji. He was the basically the third king of the Bhutan, okay. Now he was basically ruled, or he was basically the king of the Bhutan, who was also known as the Druk Gyalpo. The Druk Gyalpo in the Bhutanese language is basically considered as the king of the Bhutan. I'll come to that, why the kings of the Bhutan are also known as the Druk Gyalpo, but his original name was the Jigme Dorji Wangchuk, right? His full name was Jigme Dorji Wangchuk, but every such kings of the Bhutan is also known as the Druk Gyalpo, right? So he was also the Druk Gyalpo at that point of the time, but effectively you can say he was a third king of Bhutan. Okay, fine. I'll come to that, the Druk Gyalpo concept, a bit later. Now the Druk Gyalpo or the Jigme Dorji was basically having the strong vision, right? So he began to open the Bhutan to the outside world at that point of the time. So what happens is he started the modernization projects, and he started also took the steps towards making the Bhutan, right, a full democratization, or towards the full democratization. So the Dantec was tasked to construct some sort of a motorable roads in the kingdom, so that the economic connectivity, social connectivity between the people can be held. Okay, so the Dantec completed the road, basically connected the Samdrup Jonkar to Tangeng in 1968. This was the one such project that was completed early in 1968. Okay, then the Thimphu was basically connected by, to the Puto Sholing by the Dantec project itself, and many such Bhutanis basically volunteered to work under this project, because it was basically the project which was, for the all around development of the Bhutan. Okay, fine. So some of the notable projects that were basically executed, right, there were basically the Paro airport, the Zongfula airfield, the Thimphu, threshing highway, the telecommunication hydropower infrastructure projects, right, the college constructions, right, India House Estate. So many such infrastructure project was basically done at that point of the time, and medical and educational facilities was also completed, right. And over 1,200 Dantec personals were also laid their life for the construction of the important infrastructure in the Bhutan. So this is what you say is the basically, is the political map of the Bhutan. So the Bhutan is nothing but basically a Buddhist kingdom, right? It is a Buddhist kingdom which are there on the Himalayan eastern edge, right? And the Bhutan is basically known for the monasteries. Okay, it is also known for the fortresses, right, as well as very dramatic landscapes. Okay, so it is famous for various types of monasteries, okay, which is basically, found on the Himalayan region. Fine. Now, as I told you, it is a landlocked country in the eastern Himalaya. So it is bordered by the China. So you can say it is bordered by the China to the north, right? Here you can see to the India to the south, right? So to the north it is bordered by the China, and to the south it is bordered by the India. Okay, and Nepal and Bangladesh lies to the proximity, right? The Nepal and the Bangladesh, but both of these countries do not share the land border with basically your Bhutan. Okay, now I was telling you about the basically the concept called the Druk Galpo. What is Druk Galpo, right? So first of all, you must understand the Druk Galpo is also known as the head of the state. In the Bhutanese term, it is known as the head of state. So every king who is basically the ruling the country, or who is basically the head of the state, is also known as the Druk Galpo. It is basically in the Dzongkha language, right? It is basically known as Druk Galpo. Now, even Bhutanese people call themselves as a Drukpa, right? That means a dragon people. And one more information I can give you, that the current ruler or current king or current head of the state is basically the Zigme Khesar Namgyel Wangchuk. Okay, he is basically the current king of the Bhutan, or you can say he is the fifth Druk Galpo. He is the fifth Druk Galpo, right? That means he is the fifth king of the Bhutan, or fifth head of the state of Bhutan. All right. So I hope it is clear. Fine. Let's move to the new news. The next is basically the 93rd Academy Awards. So I hope everybody have listened about the Oscar. So this year the US movie, right, which is named as the Nomadland, basically emerged as the winner specifically in the 93 Academy Awards, right? And it was basically have made a history making award for the director Cole Zhao, who has also won, or who is also a female who has won this award. So a Nomadland, or the Nomadland for which Oscar have been awarded, basically a recession era tale, right? I'm just giving you a brief introduction. It's a recession era tale, or it's a story about the community of the Ven dwellers, right? Who used to dwell in the Vens in the American, West, and it won the Oscar for the Best Picture, right? For the purpose of the 93rd Academy Award. And the film basically stars, right, the Frances McDormand, right, which is a widow, right, in a depressed Nevada mining town. It is basically a town in the USA, right, who turned her van into a mobile home, right, for the purpose of screening the film, and set out on the road, right. And she started basically taking out certain seasonal jobs and making friends all along the way. You're getting my point? So that is how a story was basically depicted. And the McDormand won her third Oscar for the Nomadland, right? Which is basically, gave her a huge reputation, specifically one of the best actresses in the generation, in her generation. Okay. And in the best surprise to the ceremony, basically for 93rd Academy Award, is that the best actor went to the Anthony Hopkins. Okay, I'll come to that a bit later, but just I'm giving a brief introduction that a best actor award gone to the Anthony Hopkins for his performance as an elderly man, right, which is having a dementia, right, in the father. So he was basically also given the best actor award to that. Okay. So the Chole Zhao, who is basically, the director, basically has made a history of the first woman of the color to get the best director award. Okay. And she is basically a second woman to win the best director after the Catherine Bigelow, who were also won the award in 2010, right, for the prize for the Hurt Locker. Okay. Now Zhao drama basically shows the marginalized American, right, specifically the Ven dwellers. Okay, as I told you, that it's a recession era tale or story, specifically in the American West, in the Nevada town, which is roaming in the basically Vens, and which are honored the best picture director and actresses for the Frances McDormand, who is basically a female who has gone or who has won the Oscar for the best actresses. And as I told you that the best actor award has been gone to the Anthony Hopkins. Okay. Who is basically also shown its best performance as an elderly man who is having the dementia, right, and shattering the basically portrait of the dementia which is suffering in the fathers that make the oldest actor to win a competitive Oscar in the history. So he is basically 83. Okay. So here you can see the Nomadland, which is basically the 83 old person Anthony Hopkins, who have won, as well as the female who have won the best actress award in this movie called Nomadland. Okay. Next, the single crystal components. So here, let us understand the news. Then we'll go to that. What is the single crystal component, or what is the single crystal technology? So Defense Research Development Organization, DRDO, has developed this technology, which is known as the single crystal blade technology. This single crystal blade technology have certain aerospace applications, specifically in the manufacturing of the helicopters, specifically their blades, right? So in the helicopter development program, specifically in the indigenous development program, right, you also need a certain blades, right, for helicopter engine and for other purpose. So for that purpose, a single crystal blade technology have been developed by Defense Research and Development Organization. So let us understand first what is this DRDO. So as I told you that Defense Research and Development Organization is basically an agency under Department of Defense Research and Development, specifically in the Ministry of Defense, Government of India. The DRDO is charged with the military research as well as the development, and it is headquartered in New Delhi. Okay. Now, what is that single crystal blade technology? Now let us go to a bit deeper about the helicopter development. So as you know that the helicopters, as everybody would have seen also, the helicopters need a compact and the powerful aero engines, because every time they have to perform certain complex maneuvers in the air, definitely. So they were operating in the certain extreme environments, right? And to achieve this, a certain state of art, blades are needed. So this single crystal blades are having the complex shape, right, which is best fitted for such operational work. And it is basically having certain geometry which are basically made out of the nickel based super alloy. So they are made up of the nickel based super alloy, which is having the complex shape and the geometry. And the most important aspect of the single blade technology is that they are made up of the nickel based superalloy, and they can withstand the very high temperature during the operation. So that is the most crucial. They can withstand very high temperature. Okay. And I would also tell you that very few countries in the world have ability to design and manufacture such component. For example, only a few countries like US, UK, France, and Russia. And now India is also having this technology, which is known as single crystal blade technology, for the purpose of blades which may be used right in the helicopter development. So as I told you, it's a part of the program that was taken by the Defense Metallurgical Research Laboratory, right, which is a laboratory with the DRDO, to develop the 5 sets, that is the 300 in a number, in the single crystal high pressure turbine blades that will be based on the nickel based super alloy. Okay, that I've explained you just now. Okay, now as you know that helicopters use in the strategic operations, in the defense operations, so they need a compact and powerful aero engines to lift, right, and to have the reliable operations, specifically in the extreme conditions, right. And to achieve that, the single crystal blade technology have been developed. So it is basically used with the nickel based super alloy. Now let us understand what is that nickel based super alloy, right. So first of all, now understand what is the property of nickel based super alloy that can withstand the very high temperature. So first of all, it's had excellent chemical properties. For example, it has the high fatigue strength. So high fatigue strength is one of the property. Then it is also having the thermal stability. Okay, that can be asked in your preliminary also. Okay, then it is also resistant, okay, to corrosion. This is also one of the important property of of your nickel based superalloy, right. And it can also use under severe conditions, right. For example, nearly 50% of the weight of the aircraft engine is made up of the nickel based superalloy. So in certain severe conditions it can be used. As I told you, very few countries have developed. So now the India has also developed in the fleet of the countries which have developed this, the single crystal blade technology. Yeah, US, UK, France, and Russia. Okay, and it has basically some of the specific or special ceramic composition, right, which have been formulated to withstand the the metallostatic pressure of the liquid, and that can withstand even at 1500 degrees Celsius, right, during the casting operations. So which will be useful for that purpose. All right. So here is the technology. Next, the private sector banks. As you know, in the private sector banks and public sector banks, the differences are there. Okay, the private sector banks, the majority of the shares are basically held by the public. That means government basically would be the major stakeholder in the public sector bank. In the private sector banks, it is being basically held by the private entities or private stakeholders. Now, the Reserve Bank of India, which is a central bank, okay, now it has certain powers under the Reserve Bank Act. Now, under this power, the Reserve Bank of India basically issued certain directives, right, to the private sector banks regarding regarding the tenure of the managing directors of the private sector bank, the chief executive officers of the private sector banks, full-time directors of the private sector banks, right. So this time the Reserve Bank of India has fixed the tenure, right, for MD, CEO, or full-time director in the private sector banks at 15 years. That means they cannot hold the position or the rank of MD, CEO, or full-time director for more than 15 years at a time. Okay, and the central bank or the Reserve Bank of India also prescribed that they cannot hold the MD or CEO beyond the 70 years of their age. That means that it should be 70 years. After that, they should be compulsorily retired. Okay, so now this directive, which is basically provided by the Reserve Bank of India, right, which is basically with regard to the certain meetings of the board and compositions of the board with regard to the age, tenure, remuneration which will be provided to the directors, and appointment of such type of MD, CEO and whole-time director is basically under the Reserve Bank of India Act 1934. This power have been given to the Reserve Bank of India Act. Now let us understand, right, a brief, first of all, that it would come with a master direction on a corporate governance in the bank, specifically in the due course. Okay. Now, the post of MD, CEO, and whole-time director cannot be held by the same person for more than 15 years, as stated by and the directions given by the central bank. Now let us understand these posts: MD, CEO, and the board related, the post in the private sector bank. So as you know that most banks, like any other, the large businesses, are run as a corporations. Okay. Now, with definitely having some sort of leadership of the different parties, specifically at the board level. So for the day-to-day operations, most of the banks is left basically to its managers or the board of the directors. Okay. To the managers specifically, right? The managers basically who runs the day-to-day businesses, and the board of the directors is usually appointed by the shareholders, right? What's the purpose of appointing this board of the directors? To monitor and to govern the bank's operations, and thereby by appointing of this board of the directors, they basically safeguard the shareholders' investment in such banks. Okay. Now the board of the directors which are appointed, now these are does not manage the bank, but you must understand one of the foremost duty is to pick the people who will manage the bank, right? For the purpose, the board of the directors or simple board must select and appoint the bank's top executive. That may be in the form of MD, or that may be in the form of CEO, or the whole-time director. So it is, after hiring this, the chief executive officer, let's say, okay, the board must regularly review his performance. So there is the board of the directors who were basically trustee or who were basically appointed by the shareholders to basically manage the bank operations, right? And all such things were basically there. And then the board of the directors must select and appoint a bank's executives like MD, CEO, and whole-time directors, and to basically review their performance, right? So in the conjunction with the top banks officers, you can say that board is responsible for formulating the broad goals, right, the strategies for the banks. And here the board of the directors not only help to lay out the bank's goals, but also they also act as a watchdog in this whole process. Okay. So let's come back after discussing these basics. So here the individual who is basically either MD, CEO, or the whole-time director will be eligible for the reappointment as a MD or CEO or the whole-time director, but if that is considered necessary and it is desirable by the board, that was I was explaining just now, and definitely it has also made that there should be a cooling period of 3 years. That means there should be a minimum gap of 3 years, right, subjected to meeting other conditions regarding its eligibility. Okay. Now Reserve Bank of India further says that during this 3 years cooling period, the individual shall not be appointed or associated with the bank, right, either directly or indirectly. That means 3 years cooling period should be completely. Okay. And with regard to other, the upper age which have been set, that Reserve Bank of India clearly says that no person would continue beyond the age of 70. That means the 70 is the maximum age for the person to continue to hold the post of MD, CEO, or whole-time director. Okay. And the Reserve Bank of India also said that the maximum age for the chairman and non-executive directors are basically fixed at the 75 years. Now you would be thinking, what is this non-executive director? So I will explain you a bit in the brief. So in the non-executive director is basically a member of the company's board of directors. Just I was explaining about the board of directors. So he is basically a member of the board of director, but who is not a part of the executive team. That is what we call them, non-executive director. So he is not a part of the executive team, and that for the purpose, a non-executive director typically does not engage in the day-to-day management of the organization, but definitely a non-executive director basically involved in the policy making as well as in the planning exercises regarding the banks. All right. So let's move to the new news, that is Ladakh ignited Mines project. What is that? So first of all, you must understand the Ladakh has made basically a union territory recently. Now, in the Ladakh, for the specifically for the students, specifically the Ladakhi students, right, to provide a better educational opportunities, the Indian Army has initiated a project called the Ladakh Ignite Minds, right? So that is, a center of excellence and a wellness with other agencies. So here, on behalf of Indian Army, the Fire and Fury Corps, I'll come to that a brief later. What is that Fire and Fury Corps? But you must understand it is a part of Indian Army. So on behalf of Indian Army, the Fire and Fury Corps have signed a couple of memoranda of understanding with different PSUs like Hindustan Petroleum Corporation Limited, as well as it will be acting as executive agencies, as well as a NGO which is based in the Kanpur, right? The National Integrity and Education Development Organization in the Leh. So what is that Fire and Fury Corps for the purpose? See, Fire and Fury Corps is also known as the 14th Corps. It is also known as the 14th Corps, but simply it is also known as the Fire and the Fury Corps. Right? It is a corps of Indian Army. Okay, it is a part of the Army's Udhampur-based Northern Command. Listen carefully. It is a part of the Indian Army's Udhampur-based Northern Command. So Indian Army have been divided into various commands. So I was talking about the Northern Command, and it is part of the Udhampur based the Northern Command, and that part is known as Fire and Fury Corps. Okay, the 14th Corps looks after the military deployment along the Kargil Leh border, right? And they also looked for the frontiers like China, Pakistan, and also they guard the Siachen glaciers also. Okay, now this project, which is also known as Ignited Minds project, is basically aimed at providing the better training facilities to the disadvantaged Ladakhi students, and definitely to give them opportunity to study in the Nike educational institutions in the country. For example, a first batch basically consisting of the 20 girls, right, among the 45 students from the Leh and the Kargil, right, would get the training for the IIT JEE, that is a prestigious examination. Everybody would have listen about this examination, right, as well as the NEET for the purpose of the medical or pre-medical test, right, which is for the purpose of getting the medical education, right. So for the purpose of 45 students, among them 20 girls would be trained for JEE or NEET entrance examination. So here the Fire and Fury Corps, or the Corps 14 of the Indian Army, with the support of HPCL, would provide the holistic training for the Ladakhi youths for the purpose of this one. Okay, so here you can see the Ladakhi Ignited Minds. There was signing of MOU with various agencies. Okay, next, Somalia. So Somalia, as you know that Somalia is basically having is also known as the Federal Republic of Somalia. It is a country in the Horn of Africa. Okay, I'll come to that Somalia about its political map, but you must understand it is also known as the Federal Republic of Somalia. It's a country in Horn of Africa. Now, the Somalia has a lot of problems. It has the problem like piracy, or pirates are there. It has also the civil war or Islamist insurgency, specifically in the Somali land. So it has engulfed in the Islamist insurgency and the civil war, and it's also facing the worst political crisis in the recent years, right? So the president Muhammad Abdullahi Muhammad, which is best known by his nickname Formazo, has faced the harsh criticism, right, specifically from the former allies, right, after signing of law which is approved by the parliament, which basically extended its mandate by 2 years. So which has basically after its signing of a law which extended its mandate, have criticized by various the foreign allies, specifically of controlling that the basically Somalia specifically for that purpose. Okay, now the clashes which were basically occurred in the Somalia, specifically in the northern neighborhoods of the Senka, right, which is basically, you can also understand, which is a part of the Somali, and the Mariana, as well as the busy crossroads, which are also known as KM4 crossroads, which begin dozens of the supporters which are basically started marching in a protest against Mr. Formenzo's term extension, which was recently been signed by Mr. Formenzo's by 2 years, right? So they were basically, showing the opposition or showing their protest against such move. Okay, so important information about the Somalia. So first of all, the Somalia is basically a Federal Republic of Somalia, is a country in the Horn of Africa. Okay, now it is bordered by Ethiopia to the west, the Djibouti to the northwest, the Gulf of Aden to the north, Indian Ocean to the east, and Kenya to the southwest. And the Somalia has also the longest coastline on the African mainland, and its capital is Mogadishu. Okay, so here you can see the Somalia, which is basically having the largest coastline, right, specifically in the African land. Okay, and it is basically the longest coastline, and its capital is basically the Mogadishu. And here you are clearly seeing that it is bordered by Ethiopia, right, to the west, Djibouti to the northwest here, okay, and the Gulf of Aden to the north, clearly shown here, the Indian Ocean to the east, clearly shown here, and Kenya to the southwest. It is clearly shown here. Okay. Now let us understand about the clashes which was there on the Somaliland. First of all, there is Somali civil war that is concentrated in the southern and central Somaliland. So it is the southern and the central Somaliland where the civil war is basically concentrated, right? As well as is concentrated in some parts of the northeastern Kenya. The northeastern Kenya is also involved in certain set of the Somali war. So here the southern Somalia as well as the northeastern Kenya is basically involved in this, the fierce competition for the resource and power, specifically in the Somali civil war, specifically in 2009 and onward. Okay, and there is a conflict between the federal government of Somalia, which is assisted by the African Union peacekeeping troops, which were also stationed in the southern Somalia, right? And there were various militant groups and the factions which were also supported. Okay, now the violence which was started, right, which has displaced the thousands of the people, specifically in the southern part of the country, right, as telling you, right, and the conflict is seen as a major fight between, the Al-Sahab, right, which is also extremist organization or the Islamist organization based in the Somalia, which is also causing so much destruction in the Somalia. All right, fine. So let's move to the new news. CSIR, CMERI, Durgapur. So first of all, what is CSIR? That is Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. What is CMERI? That is Central Mechanical Engineering Research Institute. That is Central Mechanical Engineering Research Institute. That means the Central Mechanical Engineering Research Institute comes under the Council of the Scientific and Industrial Research. So here the CSIR, CMERI, Durgapur has indigenously developed the oxygen enrichment technology, right? This oxygen enrichment technology may be effective for the treating of the coronavirus pandemic patients. As you know that the basically, we have shortage of the medical oxygens. So this, the oxygen enrichment technology would definitely help in the alleviation of the shortage of the medical oxygens in the country. So what is the Central Mechanical Engineering Research Institute? It is first of all a public engineering research institute. Okay, it is being based in the Durgapur in the West Bengal, and you can say that it is a constituent laboratory of the Indian Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. What is CSIR then? The CSIR, the full form is Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. It is basically abbreviated as CSIR. Okay, it is established by the Government of India way back in September 1942 itself as an autonomous body, and now it has emerged as one of the largest research and development organization in the country. Okay, so for the development of the oxygen enrichment technology, it is basically in the news. So it is a constituent laboratory of CSIR. Okay, so this institute is not only the national level research institute in the field of mechanical engineering India. Okay, and it was founded in 1958. Okay, so it is basically one of the best mechanical research institute in this field. So let us understand a brief about what is that the oxygen enrichment technology. Okay, oxygen enrichment technology. Now let us understand what is oxygen enrichment technology. Okay, so first of all, in the oxygen enrichment technology, what happens is you will have to generate the oxygen. Now what will happen, there is certain system, the schematic for the purpose of the oxygen generation. So what happens is, in the oxygen injection system, right, those who are mechanical engineering students, they can very well understand, right? The oxygen injection system, where the oxygen is generated, is basically connected to the kiln burner, right, to enhance the combustion of fuel. Now what happens is, in general, what happens is the use of oxygen is basically enrich the combustion air in the clinker, right, in the clinker burning process. Now what happens is, in this process, the energy efficiency would increase, and the production capacity of the plant will increase. So ultimately, in the oxygen enrichment technology, you can understand that the energy efficiency would increase, the production capacity would increase, and there would be the substitution of the fossil fuels by the low calorific value, and in that purpose, the specific CO2 emissions can also be reduced. So in the oxygen enrichment technology, right, where certain plants is basically adapted to improve the production capacity, you can understand that an increase of 25 to 50% the capacity, right, it will be definitely helpful in terms of alleviation of the oxygen shortage, and it will be definitely, boon for those patients who are basically recovering from coronavirus pandemic. Okay, next, the herd immunity. Okay, now let us understand first of all what is herd immunity, then we'll come to the news. Let us understand the basics of the herd immunity. So what is herd immunity? Herd immunity is basically a form of indirect protection. It is a form of indirect protection. Okay, now definitely from the infectious diseases that occur with some diseases, right, when sufficient percentage of the population has become immune, either because of infection or through the vaccination or previous infections, thereby reducing the likelihood of the infections for the individuals who definitely lack the immunity. So in the herd immunity, the World Health Organization always support, right, the herd immunity should be achieved through the vaccination, and WHO never support that it should be allowed, right, the disease to spread through any segment of the population, right, so that will unnecessarily cause the deaths and chaos in the society. So the herd immunity against the COVID-19 should be achieved in the society through the protecting the people, right, through the vaccination, right, and they should not be exposed them to the pathogens that causes the virus or that causes the disease called corona. Okay, so the vaccines basically train our immune system. How the vaccines work, as you know, that the vaccines basically train our immune system to create a proteins, right, these proteins basically fight with the disease, right, these are called basically antibodies. Now what happens is, when we are exposed to the disease, right, definitely the vaccines work without making us sick, but you must also understand that the vaccinated people are protected from getting the disease in the question, and thereby they can break the chains of the transmission. But here the most important aspect of the herd immunity is that what is the percentage of the people that is needed to achieve this herd immunity? That is the another the question. So first of all, the percentage of the people that is needed to immune, right, in order to achieve this herd immunity, okay, varies with the disease to disease. That means it is not similar for every disease, it varies. Okay, for example, if you see the previous records, the herd immunity against the measles, right, which require about 95% of the population to be vaccinated. That means in the measles during the pandemic, it required 95% of the people to be vaccinated before the herd immunity is achieved. Okay, and the remaining 5% could be protected, right, definitely the people, it will not spread to those who are vaccinated, right, definitely. And if you consider the polio, right, the herd immunity, or it required basically around 80% of the population should be vaccinated. So threshold is around 80%, But again, for the corona, the study has not been done exhaustively. Okay, so the proportion of the population that could be needed, right, for the vaccination, right, before being achieving this herd immunity is again a scanner is not known. So it's an important area of the research. So for that purpose, at least we should ensure that around 90% of the people should be vaccinated. Okay, so in the herd immunity, you can, in short, you can say it is also known as population immunity, right? It is basically an indirect protection, which is basically provided by, from the infectious disease, right? And when the immunity develops in the population, either through the vaccination or through the previous infection, with any way. Okay, and the herd immunity does not mean that unvaccinated or individuals who have not previously been infected are themselves immune. But you must understand, instead, the herd immunity exists when an individual who are not immune, okay, but lives in a community here, okay, but they lives in the community, right, where there is a high proportion of the immunity. Here, this point should have reduced the risk of the disease as compared to the non-immune individuals who are residing in the community with a small proportion of the immunity. So that is how the herd immunity basically works in that parallel. Okay, and here you must understand, in the community of high immunity, let's take another the case study. The non-immune people have lower risk of disease than the people otherwise would be. Okay, so definitely their reduced risk results in the immunity of the people, specifically in the community they are living, right? And it's not because they are personally immune. Okay, so that all is needed for the achievement of the herd immunity. For that purpose, we need the vaccination of the majority, the maximum number of the people, specifically for the purpose of the providing the better protection in the population, right? For the purpose of, the saving the life, right? Millions of the people have died in this pandemic. Okay, so here you have no immunity, but because of vaccination, because of immunity, because of infections, some immunity have developed. And now, because of the maximum amount of vaccinations, around 90% and above, okay, the herd immunity have developed. So here, the red basically marks that there is no immunity. Red basically signs the virus, right? The virus strains in the population. So as you move from the vaccination schedule, right, here you can see the reds are basically going down, right? So that shows that some form of immunity is developing in the society, but it takes a year for being before being developed a complete immunity from any viral disease. Okay, next. Next news is the Krishnamurti Santhanam. The Krishnamurti Santhanam was basically a noted Indian nuclear scientist, right? The External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar has expressed a grief over the demise of the Indian nuclear scientist Krishnamurti Santhanam. Okay, so he was basically an Indian nuclear scientist, and he was also the field director of the DRDO, okay, Defense Research and Development Organization, during basically the nuclear test which was conducted in the Pokhran second, which is basically in the Rajasthan. Okay, and the Krishnamurti Santhanam, a noted Indian nuclear scientist, was also awarded a Padam Bhushan, which is basically the third highest civilian award in 1999 for its outstanding contribution as a field director with the DRDO during the test which is conducted at Pokhran second. Okay, so he is Krishnamurti, Santhanam. Fine. Let us understand Sahel. So, first of all, the Sahel is basically a eco-climatic and biogeographic realm of in the basically in the transition in the Africa between the Sahara in the north and the basically Sudanian Savannah to the south. So why it is a news? The Sahel basically a part of the Chad also. Now the Chad was basically a country which was also the former French colony. Now is prime outpost of the West, specifically to fight the Islamist militants across the Sahel region. So Sahel region is now is having the problems of Islamic militants specifically in this region, and the France having the strong military presence in the Sahel region to fight against the Islamic militants across the region. And the Sahel region is basically a semi-arid climate, and it basically stretches across the south central latitudes of the northern Africa between Atlantic Ocean and the Red Sea. So if you see in the Sahel region, it is basically a semi-arid region. Okay, now it is extending from Senegal. If you just see the political map, so Senegal is a country and it is basically extended eastward up to the Sudan. Okay, so it is basically formed a transition zone between the arid Sahara Desert to the north and the belt of the humid savannas to the south. Okay, in that north and south extremities, and from east and west, you say the Senegal eastward up to the Sudan. Okay, so Sahel basically stretch, you can say that, from Atlantic Ocean eastward through the northern Senegal, and then southern Mauritania, and then greater band towards in the Mali, right, and then up to the Nigeria and the Chad and up to the Sudan also. Okay, so here the Sahel basically a part of the Africa which include a lot of other countries also. For example, northern Senegal, Mauritania, the Mali, the Burkina Faso, and up to the extreme south of Algeria, Niger, as well as the Nigeria, and then up to the Cameroon, Chad, Sudan, right? So they were all part of the Sahel region where the Islamist activist or Islamic extremist activities is basically prevailing, and it is basically hampering the peace process specifically in this region. All right, so here you can understand the Sahel region, which is basically part of many countries. All right, so that's all for today. Thank you very much for attending this session. We'll meet tomorrow for our next current affairs. Thank you.